All right, our speaker this afternoon is Merlee Steele Rodway. She is a registered nurse with 25 years of experience as a staff nurse, a head nurse in neonatal intensive care, plus 10 years in infection control. For 3 years, she held the position of Regional Director for Infection Prevention and Control and Medical Service Device Reprocessing. Merlee is currently the Regional Director for Medical Device Reprocessing with the largest health authority in Newfoundland and Labrador, Eastern Health. She is a past president of Newfoundland Labrador chapter of Infection Prevention and Control Canada and has served on numerous special interest groups with IPAC Canada and other nursing boards and associations. She is a founding member and vice president for the newly formed Canadian Association for Medical Device Reprocessing. Please put your hands together and welcome Merlee.
Thank you. I was just saying I'm at the age now that I need glasses for close-up and glasses for far away, so I have 2 pairs with me. If you see me faltering, that's why. So thanks for inviting me to speak today, and it's good to see a number of you back this afternoon. So one of the things I've noticed is that all of these sessions are kind of linking into each other, so it's very good that we're doing that. So cleaning the MDR way, training and staff competencies. I guess I want to thank Linda and Rita earlier this morning as well, because they've kind of moved me along into this segue. So I'll get my little clicker. So disclosures. I have nothing to disclose, but I would really like for somebody to ask me to do some of the research projects like Dr. there. So that would be really good. There's lots of thoughts and discussions here today about that. My only, I guess, disclosure is that, I want to thank everybody for inviting me here. And, working as a director for medical device reprocessing and IPAC, it was a very challenging few years. And I was successfully able to pass it on to someone else. So nothing to disclose, only I'm from Newfoundland, Labrador. And so, of course, I have to start a session with a picture. This is the Northern Peninsula in St. Anthony, the town of St. Anthony, and yes, a cruise ship can get into that port, so it's quite interesting. That was somewhat of a sunny day. There was no fog, so that was good. So just in case any of you want to come across on the ferry after you're finished touring Nova Scotia, you're welcome. So what my objectives for today are to discuss the definition of reprocessing, review the minimum qualifications for education and training of personnel who perform reprocessing, and to discuss staff competencies. Most of the stories, I guess the other disclosure is that most of the stories that I tell are coming out of my own health authority, and I guess most of the prevention stories that I'm telling. So this is a typical discussion from some of the MDR staff. And actually, I need to speak a little bit about MDR, medical device reprocessing departments. And Linda and Rita, I believe, alluded to the fact that the name has changed. So Canadian Standards Association has developed and renamed their titles of some of their documents. So most people in Canada now are looking to change the name of their department from CSR, Central Supply, or SPD to Medical Device Reprocessing Department. And the purpose of that is part and parcel to increase the professionalism and the stature of those departments, because they're always in the basement of the building, but really, like environmental services, they're probably one of the most important people, our staff who work in our departments. So this, 2 of our male MDR technicians say, how has your morning been so far, Gus? By 8:30 in the morning, very busy, helped deliver 4 babies, remove a gallbladder, rebuilt a jaw, and all before the first coffee break. And that is exactly what it's like. A day in the life of an MDR technician would be another good title for a presentation. So reprocessing defined. Reprocessing is not just sterilizing a piece of equipment or an item. There's a whole aspect of processes that are required, and when I say required, it means they are required. Not just like it was years ago, somebody washed it in the sink, as we alluded to earlier. So there's the cleaning, and then with the cleaning is the pre-cleaning. That's where it really starts. And that's where a lot of us, I think, from IPAC and MDR have our issues with, is that we're trying to ensure that all the staff who deal with or handle the equipment are prepared and educated into the pre-cleaning. Disinfecting, packaging, sterilization, sharpening. So who would have thought that sharpening was a responsibility of an MDR technician? It is, in effect. And in some cases, those staff are not trained for the sharpening of some of those devices. Repairing, now not to the circumstance of a repair of an official repairing company, but minor repairs, they may have to do some of that. Relubricating instruments and equipment, recalibrating. And recalibrating is one of the pieces that I think is something that you should all look at in your departments with regards to how the staff are recalibrating some of the operating room equipment. The more you look, we know, the more we find. So when I became director for MDR and IPAC, well, actually prior to that, I was an infection control practitioner and then a coordinator. So we decided that we would be auditing our departments, and we would be looking for things. And so even though you audit and you look, you go back 3 times more, you'll still find something else that they omitted to tell you. And an example of that would be, we used to reprocess spoons for the ENT specialists. So Eastern Health covers everything on the eastern Avalon Peninsula. I don't know if you're familiar with Newfoundland Labrador map, but so we have, geographically, we're very vast. I've gone to all of our sites. I try to visit there every couple of months to make sure I'm visible. And so we did our audits, and the directive went out. Nobody was this was 2 years ago. So just the other day, we did another, well, we audit all the time, but we went back out again, and all of a sudden, one of the staff at one of our sites said, we're still doing those spoons for such and such. And I thought, you send out a memo, you educate people, you meet with the operating room staff. And so there's always those little lapses, and there's no intention for the lapses, so this is why it's important for IPAC and MDR to be partnered and to be constantly looking at those things. So where does reprocessing start? Well, we talked a little bit about pre-cleaning, but it starts at the bedside, or it starts in the operating room theaters, or it starts in clinic procedure rooms. Now, you'll see in slides further ahead, it starts even out in the community and in the pre-hospital care areas. So, just what do you think? There's the manager there, and someone's coming in and wants to work in the sterile supply department, as it was called. Just what do you think qualifies you to become a technician in our sterile supply department? So a lot of times when you're looking at your staffing complements and you're posting for replacement staff, it would be a good idea for those of you who have some responsibility either in MDR or with IPAC, MDR, partnering together. I like to keep using those words because I think you need to work side by side as a team and be involved with the human resources departments as to what requirements staff need to have to work in those departments. Years ago, people came off the street and were just, as I guess Rita and Linda alluded to, given a pan or a sink and said detergent, could be Sunlight liquid, and just go ahead and clean the equipment. So what are the qualifications? Qualifications have changed over the last couple of years, and we're trying to again impress upon healthcare and the community, governments, the importance of the staff who perform this work. So medical device reprocessing technicians, or your SPD, CSR staff, whether they're permanent or temporary, must be involved in reprocessing medical devices, shall be prepared, not should be, but shall be prepared through education and training in a formal medical device reprocessing training program, recognized by that healthcare facility. So in my health authority for the last 6 years, we require staff who come to work in our department through our job postings that they have a high school education, they have a medical device definitions course, and they also are a graduate of an approved medical device reprocessing technician course. There are several of those in the provinces in Canada. We have actually, we did a search through Canada, and we have actually identified from British Columbia to Newfoundland, Labrador, which courses that we would accept into our department. And there are some courses out there that you need to be aware of their objectives and their final resolution of the education and training. And everybody talks about foot care, so I do have to give a little story about foot care. That same thing goes for foot care courses. There is a Canadian Association for Foot Care Nurses in Canada, and they do have a list of the courses online. They have a disclaimer there, but I would really caution you to make sure that you check out some of those courses, because I have done that, and I know what some of them are claiming that they do. So it's very important. So it's a shall. So what is the connection? Why are we here talking about medical device reprocessing and within, Infection Prevention and Control Canada? So, it's very important, and I've been involved with IPAC since 2003, so I've always been a partner with both. But the primary responsibility is infection prevention and control. And in some sites, MDR is not involved or a part of the surveillance systems or the patient safety committees that they have. So that's something that I think if you're an IPAC representative on some of those committees, you should be asking for the MDR rep to sit there. Because really, who's looking at their processes? Are you looking at their processes? Everyone likes to think that their process is perfect, but there are always lapses. There's human error, human factor. There's always room for improvement. So ensure that you do partner. And I would encourage IPAC staff, nurses, practitioners, coordinators, directors to go down into your MDR and spend a few hours there in decontam in particular, and have a look at their equipment, their automated systems, and their sterilization systems. This is again similar to something that Linda Kingsbury had posted up this morning, and you can see these everywhere. You look at the cycle for the infection prevention and control, breaking the chain of infection. Well, we all have those same cycles. So when something is purchased and loaned, that's where IPAC and MDR needs to be involved at the very initial stages. And we've had a lot of problems in my organization with equipment coming in, being purchased either by a manager of a certain department, or it could be something that has to go to government for approval. So we have two tiers. There's the less than $4,000 and the greater than $4,000 pieces of equipment. And, while we have a policy that MDR and IPAC shall be involved in the purchase, policies, everybody doesn't read all the policies, so they're not always aware that they should be taken into account every day. So we'll still get a call, or MDR, I will get a call, my regional quality manager or the IPAC staff, and saying, we've just purchased this. Now, we don't know how to clean it, or do we need to clean it, So there's pulmonary functions labs, there's in the operating room, there's all kinds of refractometers, all kinds of equipment that you need to be aware of. And so get in there, get to know your department managers, and make sure they include you. So we have actually, we have a purchasing working group committee. We're going to have there's going to be four, I hate to say the word forums because nobody likes those, but there are 4 avenues where we're going to ensure that IPAC and MDR sign off on the purchases before they get into the building. And so, because the buyers, as we call them, the ones who order those items, they don't know. We have people looking for a blood pressure cuff the same as we already used. Who knows what you already used? They don't know what that is. So they're going to have some specific criteria, and everything will come back through. Same with the tenders. What's included in your tender? Get involved with the tender development of the departments and ensure that IPAC is represented there. And I don't need to say anything more about the construction and renovation, because that's been one that IPAC has certainly heightened in the last 4 years in our organizations. So I'm talking about qualifications. And for years, we know that, people were brought in off the street, or they were in the hospital and medical service aides. They're asked to work in MDR. They're being trained. Someone on the job is training them. So I'm training Linda, and Linda's training Linda, and Linda's training Michelle, and so on it goes. Someone goes on maternity leave or an education leave or a workers' comp issue. So what happens to that content? So within your MDR departments, I would think today that most of us do have official training programs and orientation, but outside of the MDR, what's really happening there in your cancer centers and your cardiac ultrasound departments? So, you know, you've all heard that story about the Jack and Jill. You know, I whisper a story to you. So this one, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And by the time it got through 3 or 4 people, it turned into Jack hijacked a pill truck with Gail, her daughter. So, you know, you guys have all heard those stories. So it's very important. And I can tell you with truth and evidence, the evidence is from my experience, of course, within my area, that we have audited, we have trained, we go back in 6 months and we re-audit, and then you find that that person's been replaced with a casual employee, and somebody showed them how to do that. They didn't come back to us for the re-education. And you know that there are some lapses that can occur. Some of the lapses may be major, some are very minor, and they can be corrected. One of the famous ones for outside of an MDR is the dating and labeling of chemicals, or detergents, or enzymatics, and if you're using any chemical sterilant, those as well. So that's very important. The logs and the documentation, not documented, not done. It's like within the nursing profession, medications not documented that you've given it, it wasn't given. So MDRT, medical device reprocessing technicians, every day they actually spend a lot of time on their feet. They're standing, oftentimes with non-ergonomic equipment and sinks. They scrub, they pick, they scrub again. If it goes through to prep and pack and there's another set of eyes on the instruments there, it goes back and gets cleaned again. There's manual cleaning, there's also the automated cleaning. And I threw this in here because just to bring it into perspective, if you're in a really busy healthcare organization, and 2 of my sites in the St. John's are the main trauma centers for the province, so, you know, there's orthopedic surgery, and those are some of the ones that you are concerned about as well as others. But how many drills and how many prostheses? We don't reprocess prostheses, but some people still do that in their departments. So I left it in there because I want to highlight that it's very important that the prostheses come back to you. You need to know, you go to your manager and you put that into a pile, to a different collection. Surgical cameras. How many can people really reprocess? Some of the really huge departments or health authorities can reprocess up to $750,000 a month. And I know with the drills, that comes another gamut of questions. How can you take apart the drills and the cameras that you use? So that's the importance of the qualifications. Decontamination defined. So as you look at qualifications, and then now we're going to look at the processes, you will start to see why there have to be requirements around the education of the staff who work there. So decontamination is the process of cleaning by use of physical or chemical means to remove, inactivate, or destroy, followed by inactivation of microorganisms in order to render the object safe for handling, not just safe for the next patient, but safe for handling by the employees. And we've talked about personal protective equipment, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. So skills and in-depth knowledge. So how in-depth does that knowledge need to be? We really, and I say we, I talk about those of us in IPAC and MDR across the country, want to raise the bar for medical device reprocessing technicians. It is a specialized profession. As I said, the operating rooms cannot function, and certain other endoscopy units cannot function without these people. So it is specialized. It's very technical. There's a lot of technicalities to learn about in this equipment. And certainly today, technology is advancing faster than some of our brains, and I say at my age, seasoned. I mean, the kids can do more with technology today than we can, and Linda Jakeman can attest to that, for sure. Knowledge of the standards and best practices. So I was at a presentation yesterday, and, you know, we've heard this saying that knowledge is power. If you have the knowledge, then you have the power to make the changes within your organization for the better. So it's very important to have that knowledge. The standards are written from the Canadian Standards Association. We've got our best practice documents out of Ontario, BC, Alberta, and the list goes on, and other provinces are working on their own as well. So then that knowledge background, and some of it is evidence-based, some is not, some is more experiences or anecdotal through the CNIS program, the Canadian Nosocomial Infection Disease Surveillance System. So a lot of those aspects of error are identified, and then those of us who have networks across Canada are talking to each other. So if Diane Trudeau in BC has an issue with a drill, you know, we have our contact lists across the country, and we're emailing each other and saying, you know, what do you have with this? So I'm just going to stop for a second because I was going to put on my own timer and I didn't, and I can see this one here is not even on. It's gone back to 0, so we're doing really good. But I know that Darlene is keeping tabs on me, so there you go. So what goes wrong when you're not trained? This is an example of the interior of an endoscope lumen. You can see biofilm, and I'm not going to say anything more about that because I know a lot of you have heard and will hear from Michelle Alpha. Biofilm can grow in 20 seconds and increase to grow fast. So there's some other examples of the instrumentation that my staff clean. Again, you can see some biofilm in the lumen, and look at those tiny suction apparatus that are there. There's a lot of discussion around suction apparatus these days, those tiny suctions that are utilized in the operating room or in ear surgery. So continuing on with training, what else is there in training that we need to talk about? So we've talked about the qualifications, but then the training continues on. You've completed your course, you get into your organization, and then there has to be an element of ongoing training. Quality management systems need to be developed in your department, and if you don't have a quality management standard, you should develop one. All of the aspects of what I'm talking about today would be part and parcel of a good quality management system, including the education component, not just the education formally, but what happens when these staff come into your department. How do you train them? How are you going to train those that are not that have not completed a qualified MDRD course? How do you bring them into the fold and you include them in your education? An orientation plan. How long does an orientation plan need to be? You know, how long does a training program need to be? What happens to us, or what happens when we take shortcuts? What happens when staff know that if they don't take a shortcut because of the demands, that they know their managers are going to support them when, you know, that surgeon comes down and says, how come you didn't sterilize that pair of screwdrivers or something that they bought at Canadian Tire? And, you know, those things have happened. And pliers and drill bits and whatnot. So they have to know that you support them so that they can say, no, we cannot do this. You have to wait. Competency checklists. Those should be developed, and there are lots to follow through IPAC toolkits and the CSA standards and PIDAC. These should definitely be done annually, but I would recommend quarterly if you can do that at all. Quarterly, certainly in the areas outside of the central MDR, because that's where your highest risk could be. I say could be because I'm not sure how all of your MDR departments are set up, but that's certainly an area that you need to be very aware of. And if you have temporary staff, casual call-in staff who are called in on occasion and they're working in an endoscopy department, how can those endoscopes that are used in GI have the lumens and the channels and the buttons and the this, and so, you know, how can you expect somebody who only works one day a month to know those things when they come in? We've got the guides on the wall, and we have people, but those are very busy units. So, you know, we recommend that you would perform an annual competency every month on those casual staff. And it might mean the day that that person's calling that you're going up and doing their competency because you're guiding them through. When I say you, it could be it's a partnership between MDR and IPAC. In my health authority in 2008, based on numerous audits that the IPAC program presented senior management executive with, they decided that medical device reprocessing department should be a standalone program. It was no longer going to be connected with environmental services or the budgeting department. Now my VP is attached to budget, which is really good because I've spent about $20 million in the last 5 years improving aspects and equipment in Eastern Health. So, you know, it's very important to make sure that they're aware of all of those aspects. Documentation, already spoken about, talked about. So where's the other connection with infection prevention and control? Staff who work in MDR need to be aware of basic microbiology. They need to know about Spaulding's classification, and you know, we talked a little bit about that. Dr. Jerry McDonald's book that Linda Kingsbury mentioned is very interesting, so I would recommend that you look at that. Disinfectants and sterilization, one-way workflow, clean and uncluttered spaces. You can't, you know, there's one endoscopy area in my department or my site, one of my sites that, you know, they're just crisscrossing. And so we're, you know, but you're reprocessing in a room the size of a bathroom, so how, or a washroom. How can you improve? So you're constantly doing Band-Aid approaches, but you ultimately have to have your short-term goal and your long-term goal. Routine practices. Everybody's familiar with routine practices. You know, I still hear people talking about universal precautions, standard precautions in all the, you know, discussions. Routine practices is very important for everyone, and we all know that. Hand hygiene, obviously, and the selection and use of personal protective equipment. And the issues about single-use and reusable personal protective equipment is something that you should be aware of in your organization and have a little check about that as well. So this is just a picture of a decontam in one of my sites, and you'll see this person who's diligently dressed. So he's got the full face shield on, but he doesn't have a mask. So, you know, there's a lot of discussion out there whether if you wear a full shield mask, should you still wear a full face shield? Should you still wear a mask? And my recommendation is that you do. If you are auditing your MDR departments or anyone who's reprocessing, that's another piece of the puzzle. Because again, if you don't have peer auditors, you will see some lapses in those areas as well. This is a clean looking decontam, very nicely, but there are two aspects of that that you'll notice. The cupboards in the back are made of a wood or a wooden laminate. So it's very important to be, not the reprocessing aspect, but the design of those areas. But you should be involved, IPAC should be involved in the design of any redevelopment. We currently have a $7 million redevelopment project within the Health Sciences Center in Eastern Health, and we have OT, OHS, infrastructure support, Biomed, who are our best friends, because they get their finger on the money, and of course IPAC and MDR, so include people. Next one is a little bit about occupational health and safety, exposure, risk to yourself. We talk to our staff about protecting themselves and their family at home, which other speakers have already spoken to as well. We have a couple of, because we can't handle the demand in our central MDR, we have 2 satellite reprocessing rooms now outside in other areas, and so we have a staff assigned to satellite reprocessing room in the cardiac ultrasound area, where they will do reprocessing the TEE probes from the OR, gastroscopes, EBIS, flexible bronchoscopes, and other equipment from PF labs. Workers, WMIS, I don't need to talk any more about that, but we do need to talk about the safety aspect. Training is continuing on into the manual versus automated systems that you have. Everybody, they need to know those pieces of equipment. The rinsing is so important, and I'm touching on some little elements here where we've identified aspects. So how long do you need to rinse that endoscope for? How many flushes do you need to give that endoscope? Collection and transport. When we think of that, sometimes we think of off-site, sometimes we think about on-site. Look at your on-site transportation systems, soil and clean devices separated, and how they are transported, who's transporting them, if they're in the same elevator as the public when they come in. Some other aspects to touch on about detergents and enzymatics, agents and methods. Enzymatics, there's detergents and there's enzymatics, so there is a difference. And there are enzymatics that are dual-tiered and multi-tiered, and what does that mean? You know, the multi-tier tend to require more, a higher temperature for activation. So again, the manufacturer's instructions for use are very important. You can't just pour that enzymatic into the sink and fill it up, so you have to have your markings. Just a few words about high-level disinfection. Use and selection is very important. Compatibilities, automated versus manual. I always recommend manual if you have to go that way. Mechanical, thermal, so your pasteurizers, what are your, how are you using your pasteurizers and your ultrasonics? Some of those discussions came up as well in the last sessions. There's also the assembly. So there's sorting, inspecting, differentiating, single use versus multi-use. So we do utilize single-use instruments in our organization. We have a policy, we do not reuse single-use instruments, but you will sometimes see those coming back on the trays back to our department. So your staff have to be astute. They have to be on their queue that day so that they can identify a single-use versus a reusable. It's great for some of us who have an instrument tracking system. We do have an instrument tracking system. Some are manual, some are electronic, and that does help you identify that. But if you don't, you still need to be able to have those people trained to detect what type of stainless steel is going through their system. Your instrumentation sets, assemblies. It's no good to send an instrumentation set to the operating room unless it's complete. So again, the staff need to know exactly what goes in some of those sets. And orthopedic surgery can take up to 3 case carts and over 5,000 pieces of equipment. So it's extremely, extremely important that the staff are fully aware of what they need. And if they don't have the access to the automated, you have the pictures for the manual. So packaging items and sets and how they're packaged, and Linda Jagman mentioned about storing and how you place them on your carts to go into your sterilizers. It's so important. If you don't store them properly, you're going to get wet packs. This is an example of a pair of scissors that came back that had the rust. So that was a single-use item. Was just used during one surgery, but it had been left obviously in the enzymatic solution coming down to MDR, and so that's how fast they'll rust. Sterilization, it is part of reprocessing, so it's just to touch on this, and because other speakers have already gone through that. But there are so many elements, the biological indicators and the chemical indicators, integrators. It's not easy. You need to know what you're doing and what you're talking about with those. You need to know your functions and the critical parameters. If you don't know your critical parameters, and you need to have an element of critical thinking. We had a wet pack issue in one of our sites on the Burin Peninsula last year, and that lasted for 6 weeks. We had to transport, we had one sterilizer, we had no redundancy. We had to transport, it was in the winter, we had to transport our dirty and our clean equipment 3.5 hours over a road that was not very good, and so that was a major concern for us. We did have to cancel some surgeries, but we rebook. But it was a smaller site, which was thankful for that. Low temperature sterilization is another piece that you need to be. A lot of people are using low temperature sterilization. That again comes with, do you need a booster? How many do you need? Do you not need a booster? And of course the immediate post-sterilization and the handling. When can you handle your instrumentation and your packages when they come out? Storage, transportation, covered containers. What kind of covered containers are they? There's occupational health and safety legislation around that. The distribution up on the nursing units. Special requirements for flexible endoscopes, endoscopic accessories. It's not one size fits all. And the storage for endoscopes now, there are a lot of new pieces of equipment coming on hand, HEPA filter channel purged with the continuous air through. And of course, again, those of you who are familiar with the endoscope and work in that field, that's another avenue that you need to be fully aware of. You need to have a lot of expertise. So here's an example. If the endoscope is not working, well, I go up on a nursing unit and I see many nurses with their coffee cups in their hand. And I say nurses, but I don't mean to generalize that. I see a lot of staff because sometimes people say they don't know who is a nurse and who's not anymore, but I think that's going to change in Canada soon. So the nurse has her camera, and she can take that picture, whatever you need, because they're high definition too now. So this is an example of education and training. We provide education training to those outside of the central MDR, to the operating room. We have the pictures, we have the reps come in, we have the educators come in, and we provide the education. But they're so busy that we still see endoscopes returned in this type of format. And it's a cystoscope. And when you look at your repair costs, until the people there, and sometimes they don't have assistants working with them in the operating room, that it's just thrown back into the pan. And so, you know, they had diagrams to show them how to store it back in. And so we've gotten to the point now, because this was recent, 2 in 1 day, that, you know, we're up there and we're going to be there right next to them, making sure that they learn how to, and you have to take that time to do it. We don't have the time, but we have to take the time. It's a 3 to 4 hour turnaround in our MDR at this point. Once we get all of our new equipment and our redevelopment, hopefully, it won't be that long. So that's the other picture. So difficult to clean devices. So, okay, why can't I just go in and, I mean, if I had to go and do I'm a certified endoscope reprocessing technician, I've done the course, but I would still need to follow my instructions. In the MDR, who identifies what's a difficult to clean device? There's been a lot of news reports and media reports about those items of late in the last couple of years. There are multiple internal channels that staff have to be aware of, crevices that you have to clean, devices that cannot be dismantled. Should you be looking at purchasing new items? Should you go back to your vendor companies? Unfortunately, we have discovered that some of the vendors do not notify you when they have a new design. And for example, drills is one example. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Have a look at that. Make sure you're working with your MDR staff. The joints and the hinges and the lure locks. Some lure locks are single use, some aren't. Yanker suctions, that's the one that hit the media in the last couple of years. And when anything comes out, everybody tends to go looking at those things. So we did look at our Yanker suctions, and I'm going to show you a picture in a few minutes. But of course, the speculums, Rita, I think, mentioned this morning about speculums in the community. Well, you still have that issue in your main centres. We had in our women's health clinics, you know, we had an trained, I guess, person, or they had an untrained staff person there doing the pre-cleaning of these speculums. And every day, we went back every day. Every day we went back, he was still reusing the same enzymatic all day long. And so, you know, even though education had been provided, so anyway, we took him out and we did more. The poor guy went off on sick leave and whatever. But anyway, when he came back though, and we started again. And so he did, like he finally, but sometimes there's those little pieces of information that you think people know. So you've got to be very clear with that. So and don't forget with those speculums, there's numerous screws that have to come apart. We did get a call from a clinic one day, and about 50 speculums showed up on our doorstep. The physician in the clinic wanted us to reprocess them because his sterilizer broke down. And when my staff looked at them, they called me and said, and called the manager who called me and said, I don't think these were ever taken apart. So then, you know what happens, and that's, you've got more work on your plate because there's a bigger picture. There's the quality and the risk. You know, they also have to be your partners. Coils. So there's a Yanker suction that our staff, we had some single use, but we also had some of these reusables because certain surgeons and anesthesiologists want to use a certain piece of equipment. So they can get away with it for a period of time, but we took that and we soaked it, and we did, my technicians, they did what they could. And this is what came out of that Yanker suction. The Yanker suctions are left on crash carts or in the operating room for however long that surgery is. So they're not immediately getting that pre-cleaning. And there were no brushes small enough. So, you know, staff are trying to blow through. They're soaking. They're trying to blow through. But there are some equipment out there that you can buy that has hookups for lumens, and there are some tinier brushes. And what do you think this is? So that was going into garbage. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm not going to spend, a lot of technicians spend up to an hour trying to clean some instruments, and it's not worth, it's more, you're paying more time than you are just replacing it. So that was left, no pre-cleaning, left for the duration of the surgery, and, you know, so. But whatever some of the recommendations, I mentioned ultrasonics with lumen hookups, brushes of the correct size, and a group of us across Canada have been looking at brushes for some of those tiny, tiny ENT surgical suctions and utensils. So that we think we're fine. We have found some tiny, tiny brushes. I'm sure they will be single use, but there's also a couple of, there is an ultrasonic that you can hook up to those tiny lumens. And so this is kind of hot off the press. We're looking at that now, and one site has purchased an ultrasonic for that. Or use single use. You know, it's difficult with money these days. and you're trying to sell that to people, to your superiors. But when you break it all down, the cost of the technician, the enzymatic, the water, the solution, the timing, everything, that's, and your equipment, your steam, and your electricity, and if you pay for your water, you're going to find out that it's much cheaper to go with single use. And when I get the flack that the environment, what about the environment? There's someone else in the organization that's looking after that. So that, you need to direct them to that area, because that is one of the things that physicians who train, or surgeons who train in Toronto or Ottawa and come to Newfoundland, they'll say, well, we can recycle these items there. And I'm saying, unfortunately, we don't yet. So reprocessing outside of the MDR. Diagnostic imaging, cancer centers. Everyone spoke about operating rooms. Pre-hospital, what happens in your pre-hospital? Single use is very, very important in the pre-hospital. Community clinics, private consultants. What's needed? Continuing education, regular intervals. Prior to the introduction of any new medical devices, work as a team. Certification is important. Competency training, competency auditing, base it on risk assessment. It has to be ongoing. Include your staff. It has to be done in decontam areas, prep and pack, sterilization, sterile storage at the unit level. I bet if you go up on one of your nursing departments and units, you'll find nobody's responsible up there. So at the end of the day, the takeaway message is to partner with MDRD. IPAC and MDRD should be working very well together. So at the end of the day of a long 8-hour shift, the MDRT goes home and goes to bed and says, no sick call, or the manager, no emergency cases, no machine breakdown, no positive BIs, no missing instruments, no OR complaints, chocolates and thanks received from a unit. Think about that when you go back to your departments, because that is so important. Remember, they're in the basement, except for in some of the newer buildings in BC. And I'm not sure where else they are, but I know British Columbia, they're moving them up. So we got to get up above that 6 foot under. So we are very important, because that's where we are. We have no windows. So references, many of the references are inclusive of what was brought forward here this morning. The IPAC Canada toolkits are important. The CSA ZAD 314, the series, their whole series, PIDAC documents, BC documents, Alberta Health Services, Health Canada, CDC, ORNAC, CSGNA, SGNA. And so I have to end with a scene again from Newfoundland. This is on the East Coast. It's in a small town called Placentia. And so again, if you're able to cross the ocean, not the pond, but cross the ocean, come over and visit us. And hopefully we can actually give you some tours of some of our MDRs if you want. So thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Just got one for you.
Really good presentation. It really touched a nerve when you were talking about staff competency, especially for casual or part-time workers. And one of the things that I think everybody struggles with is, could you share whether you have any data or comments on how frequently do casual staff need to work on a monthly basis in order to actually retain true competency, so that they can actually come in and do the job without creating, a big bottleneck or causing problems? And, any thoughts that you'd like to share on that would be great, because we always worry about casuals coming in and their competency, but I'm starting to question whether or not there might be if it's such a low frequency and it's once a month, honestly, that body, quote unquote, is not a functional body anymore. So could you share your thoughts?
Yes, and I gave that example. However, it's not the norm. What we do in our own organization, what we find is the casuals are in on a more regular basis, but we did develop a protocol that if the person was once a month, then we would provide them some continuing education. So I need to give you a little bit more background. So my department, MDRD, I was IPAC and MDR. So for 2.5 years, I relinquished the IPAC, continued with MDR. So then we started to move forward on some of those operational plans that we had developed. And that aspect is outside of the MDR, because if you don't own that department, you can't really, you can make recommendations. but you have no say over them implementing those recommendations. And so that's what we were dealing with. So anyone who's familiar with the city or the Avalon Peninsula and the Eastern Health Authority, we have the city, which is St. John's, the capital, 2 large centres, and outside in the peripheral rural areas, we have 3 sites. All of the reprocessing staff reported to me outside the city, but not inside the city. So December, there was a huge influx. We had planned things in an organized fashion. That doesn't always work out. So then all of a sudden, the GI unit in the city and the cardiac areas, the ORs, and the pediatric center wanted us to come in and take over their reprocessing because of the audit reports and the aspects. So what we discovered in the GI unit, that was one of the areas where they do use a much more casual percentage. So, but when I looked at the data from, because it was LPNs performing the reprocessing there, but when I looked at their callbacks and the costing, the casual staff were in on a regular basis. When I say regular, I mean every week. So even though we say casuals if you're once a month, but in that, the team leader will remain to be an LPN2 in that department, but she won't be performing any reprocessing duties. So then we started thinking and said, well, okay, how are you going to keep your skills if you're going to be, if they're going to be technically reporting you throughout the day? They will report to my MDR manager, but as the clinic goes by, she'll be troubleshooting. So we deemed that she would perform reprocessing at least 1 day a month. Now she's been there 10 years. That doesn't mean that she knows everything, because we recertify every year, and we have biannual education sessions. And so I have tried to include IPAC into those certification days. That doesn't always work out. But so I think you need to look at your past history for the last 6 months and see, okay, so what staff have not been in on a regular basis? And then your own health authority decide what's appropriate. So there's no concrete data, but we did look at the overtime and the callback and the number and the names of the people who were called back. So in the smaller rural areas, we only have like 3 staff at one site, so 1 casual. So they're in all the time. And it happens to be that way because the government is dictating the OR, what the OR does, and then the OR dictates what we do. So in a way, it's good. It's because we continue to give those people experience, but on the budget piece, they don't always give you the money. However, as long as there's no flack to say, look, you can't be doing this, then we just continue on, and we say we're meeting the OR demands. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but you need to kind of look back at, but I think Nova Scotia has implemented something similar to that as well, and I'm not sure how they derived of that, but I think it's important to look at your stats from before. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Merlee, and give her a good hand. One hand, yes.